papers or I'll make sure no firm in Toronto ever takes her calls again. That's what my father hissed into my ear while grinding the heel of his Italian loafer into the back of my hand. The cartilage made a sound I'll never forget, like a celery stalk snapping inside a wet towel. About 30 seconds before that, he had backhanded me across the jaw with a closed fist in the private dining room of the Granite Club in front of 17 of his oldest business associates. Because I had refused to put my name on a document that would transfer $420,000 of my younger sister's gambling debt onto my personal line of credit at RBC. I didn't scream. I didn't even gasp. I just lay there on the carpet for a beat, tasting copper, watching a thin red line trickle from my split lip onto the cream wool fibers of a rug that probably cost more than my first car. Then I pushed myself up on my good elbow, wiped my mouth on the sleeve of my blazer, and walked out past every single person in that room. Nobody stopped me. Nobody asked if I was all right. The matriarchs and their pearls just looked away into their crystal water glasses. The way you look away from a homeless man on the TTC. Before I tell you exactly how I ended up watching the RCMP put my father in unmarked cuffs at Pearson Terminal 3 less than 4 days later, do me a favor and drop a comment below. Tell me the one thing you've ever done for Blood Family that, looking back, you wish to God you'd never agreed to. I read every single one of them. I mean it. I didn't go to the hospital. I should have. The ring finger on my left hand had a fracture I could already feel humming, and the inside of my cheek was shredded where it had caught against my back molar. But I didn't drive to Sunnybrook. I didn't even call my partner Devin, who was in Calgary that weekend for his sister's wedding. I drove my Subaru straight back to my condo on King West, double-locked the door, and stood in front of the bathroom mirror for what felt like an hour. The woman in the mirror didn't look like me. The left side of her face was already starting to swell into something purple and shiny, and there was a butterfly-shaped scrape across her cheekbone from my father's ring. I ran the tap until the water was ice cold, soaked a clean tea towel, and pressed it against my jaw. The shock of it made my eyes water, but I wouldn't call that crying. I haven't cried since I was 11 years old. There's a difference. My name is Bryony. I'm 31, and on paper, I'm a senior risk manager at one of the big 5 Canadian banks downtown. My entire career is built on the same skill set. I look at messy ledgers, I find the bleed, and I write the memo that gets people fired. I do not panic. I do not improvise. I build a paper trail, I follow process, and I deliver outcomes that survive a compliance review. That part of my brain came in handy 3 days later. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My parents are Jeffrey and Marigold. Jeffrey runs or ran a mid-sized commercial real estate firm in North York that he inherited from his own father back in the 90s. Marigold doesn't work. She has never worked. She golfs at the Rosedale Golf Club in the summers and she winters in Naples, Florida. And she has spent 42 years convincing every dinner party guest she's ever met that she is a delicate, long-suffering woman, married to a difficult man. People believe her. She's very good at it. And then there's my sister. My younger sister, Camilla, who's 26, who has never held a job for more than 4 months, who totaled her first Audi before she finished her undergrad at Western, and who, in our family's private mythology, was the gifted one, the special one, the one whose dreams the rest of us were collectively responsible for protecting. I sat down on my couch with the wet tea towel still pressed to my face, and I opened my laptop with my good hand. The pain in my left ring finger was throbbing in time with my heartbeat now. But my mind had gone somewhere very clean and very cold. Because the question wasn't why my father had hit me. My father had been hitting me. In small surgical ways, my entire life. A flick to the back of the head at the dinner table. A grip on the elbow that left bruises. A slap once, when I was 16, for getting a B in calculus. The question was why he had done it in public, in front of clients, in front of 2 members of his own board. Jeffrey is a man who lives and dies by reputation. He goes to the same dry cleaner he's used for 30 years because the owner knows how he likes his collars. He doesn't lose his composure. Not ever. If he had snapped tonight in front of those people, it wasn't because he was angry. It was because he was already drowning, and I was the last lifeline he had left. I started pulling on threads. 3 years ago, when Camilla turned 23, she decided she was going to open a wellness studio in Yorkville. Crystals, sound baths, organic teas, the whole performance. Jeffrey didn't have the liquidity to seed it himself because most of his capital was tied up in a strip mall in Pickering that wasn't performing. So he came to me. He sat across from me at a steakhouse on Adelaide, and he asked me, his eyes wet for the first time in my memory, to co-sign a $100,000 BMO line of credit for Camilla's business. I should have said no. Every single internal alarm I have, the same ones I'm paid six figures to trust at work, was screaming at me. But Jeffrey said the words that work on me every single time. He said, "Your sister needs you." He said, "Family looks after family." And I signed. The studio was shut down by Toronto Public Health within 14 months because Camilla had been letting an unlicensed acupuncturist work out of the back room. I found out the loan was in default the same way most people find these things out. A call from a recoveries officer at the bank on a Wednesday afternoon asking if I was aware that I was now personally liable for $93,000 plus accumulated interest. When I confronted my parents, my mother turned on the waterworks within 90 seconds. She told me I was being cruel. She told me that Camilla had been so close to making it work and that I was the reason her dream had died. She told me that real sisters don't keep score. And I, like an idiot, paid down the loan over the next 18 months, watching my own RRSP contributions shrivel, telling myself that this was the price of being the responsible one. That was the first robbery. I just didn't recognize it as one at the time. I opened a new tab, and I logged into something I hadn't looked at in nearly 7 years. My grandfather, Jeffrey's father, had set up a discretionary family trust back in 2002, with both Camilla and me listed as beneficiaries upon reaching the age of 25. I'd never touched it. I'd never even checked the balance. Whenever I asked Jeffrey about it, he'd wave his hand and say it was being conservatively managed, that the interest was reinvested, that I'd thank him later. I believed him. He was my father, and he was a businessman, and I believed him. The online portal asked me for a password I no longer remembered. I clicked the link to reset. A security question came up on the screen, a custom one, set by the trustee, who was, of course, Jeffrey himself. The question was, who is the brightest star in our family? I sat there for a moment with my finger hovering over the keyboard, and then I laughed out loud. It came out as a dry, ugly bark because my jaw hurt. I typed in CAMILA. The portal opened immediately. I want you to understand how funny that is. My father had so completely organized his inner life around the worship of his younger daughter that he had literally used her name as the key to the vault that, by law, was half mine. He couldn't even imagine a universe in which I would be the one trying to get in. I was so invisible to him that I was, accidentally, the perfect spy. And then I looked at the dashboard, and I stopped laughing. The trust had been worth roughly $1.6 million when I'd last had any visibility into it, back when I was in my late 20s and my grandfather was still alive. Tonight, it held $11,400. $11,400. I started clicking through the transaction history, and the further I scrolled, the colder I got. There was a withdrawal of $48,000 to something called Northridge Holdings, registered, when I cross-referenced it on the Ontario Business Registry, to my sister Camilla at her condo address in Liberty Village. There was a payment of $160,000 to a numbered Alberta company that after about 10 minutes of digging, I established was a shell my father had used to settle a confidential lawsuit from a former tenant in the Pickering Plaza. There was a recurring monthly transfer of $9,000 to my mother's personal checking account at TD, labeled in the memo line with absolutely no irony as household expenses. He hadn't just dipped into the trust, he had emptied it. He had treated my inheritance like a checking account, and he had used it to fund every single failure my sister had ever had, every legal mess he had created, and every pair of Ferragamo flats my mother had ever bought at Holt Renfrew. The $420,000 of Camilla's debt he'd been trying to force onto my line of credit tonight wasn't really her debt at all. It was his debt. It was the cost of cleaning up Camilla's latest disaster, an investment scheme she'd run through her Instagram followers that had attracted exactly the wrong kind of attention from the Ontario Securities Commission. He needed my signature so that when the OSC eventually came knocking, there would be a paper trail showing the liability sat with me, the responsible daughter, the one with the steady banking job and the clean credit and the assets worth seizing. He needed me to be the body in the trunk. But that wasn't the worst part. I kept scrolling, and at the very bottom of the dashboard, in the pending transaction section, I found it. A wire transfer, scheduled to execute Monday morning at 9:01 a.m. Eastern. The amount was the remaining $11,400, which was nothing, but the destination was what made me sit up straight. It was being routed through a correspondent bank in Bridgetown, Barbados, to an account held in a name I'd never heard before. An account that I knew, immediately, would lead to a private banker my father had been quietly cultivating for the better part of a decade. He wasn't just stealing from me anymore. He was wrapping it up, cleaning the room. He was about to skip out of the country, and based on his calendar, which I happened to know was synced to a shared family iCloud he'd never thought to revoke my access to, he had a business-class ticket to Bridgetown booked for Tuesday morning, connecting through Miami. One way. I checked my watch. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Friday night. By Monday morning, the last traceable dollar would be gone, and by Tuesday afternoon, my father would be sipping rum punch in a country whose extradition treaty with Canada is, let us say, a deeply negotiable thing. I had less than 60 hours. I picked up my phone and I dialed a number I hadn't called in almost 4 years. It rang twice, and then a sleepy, irritated voice answered. "It's Bryony," I said. The voice woke up. "Bryony, what's wrong? What time is it?" His name is Faisal, and he is one of the smartest forensic accountants I have ever worked with. We met on a money laundering file in 2019 when I was still on the investigation side. He left the bank a year later and went to work at a boutique firm that does a lot of contract work for the RCMP's Integrated Market Enforcement Team. He is also, I should mention, one of maybe 3 people on Earth whose discretion I would bet my life on. I told him all of it. The party, the hand, the trust, the shell companies, the Barbados wire, the plane ticket. I talked for 19 minutes straight, and to his credit, Faisal did not interrupt me once. When I finished, he was quiet for about 10 seconds. Then he said, "You understand what you're asking me to do?" I said, "I do." He said, "This isn't a divorce. This isn't a civil suit. If we do this, your father goes to a federal pen. Probably Beaver Creek if he's lucky. Probably worse if he's not. There is no walking it back." I said, "I know." He said, "Send me everything. Encrypted. Tonight. I have a contact at IMET who will take the call at 6 a.m. Sunday morning. Don't sleep. Don't shower. Don't change your clothes. Photograph your face from 4 angles right now and email them to yourself with a timestamp. And Bryony, yes. Don't answer your phone if your father calls. Not once. Not for any reason. Do you understand me?" I understood. I spent the rest of that night and most of Saturday building a package the way I would have built a regulatory submission at work. Clean, indexed, cross-referenced, every transaction screenshotted with metadata, every shell company traced to a beneficial owner. I built a timeline that started in 2017 when the first unauthorized withdrawal from the trust had occurred and ended at 11:47 p.m. on Friday night when I had logged in and found the room empty. I did not cry. I did not eat. Around 4 in the morning on Sunday, I drank a glass of water and ate 3 crackers because I knew if I didn't put something in my stomach, my hand would start shaking and I needed my hand. My phone rang 17 times across Saturday. My mother, my mother, my father, my mother, Camilla, my mother, my father, my father, my father. I didn't pick up. I let every one of them go to voicemail, and I listened to each voicemail exactly once and transcribed the key sections into a separate document because forensic accountants like Faisal love that kind of thing. My mother's voicemails were the worst. She cycled through the entire playbook. First, she was concerned. "Bryony, sweetheart, your father is sick about what happened. He didn't mean it. We need to talk." Then she was wounded. "Bryony, I have raised you to be a better person than this. I cannot believe you would humiliate this family." Then she was operatic. "Bryony, if you do not pick up this phone, I will be forced to consider that I no longer have an older daughter." By the 7th voicemail around dinner time, Saturday, she was making threats about what their lawyer would do to me. By the 12th, she had circled back to weeping. I noticed something, listening to her. In every single voicemail, across 9 hours, she did not once ask if I was injured. She did not ask if I had been to a doctor. She did not ask if I was safe. She asked me to come home. She asked me to fix it. She asked me to be reasonable. She did not, at any point, ask me how my face was. I understood, sitting in my kitchen on Saturday night with my hand wrapped in a tensor bandage and my jaw the color of an old plum, that my mother was not a trapped, frightened woman married to a tyrant. My mother was the bookkeeper. My mother had known about the trust the whole time. My mother received the $9,000 a month. She had watched my grandfather's money get poured into Camilla's hobbies and her own lifestyle for years, and she had said nothing because her comfort had been built directly on top of my stolen future. She wasn't a victim of Jeffrey. She was his partner. That clarity, when it arrived, felt like a window opening in a room I'd been locked in my whole life. Sunday morning at 6 a.m. sharp, Faisal called me back. He said, "My contact is in. They want to meet you at 9. Not at their office. There's a Tim Hortons at Young's and Eglinton. Take the booth at the back. Bring a USB. Tell no one." He paused, and then he said, "Bryony, they want to do something. They want to use you." I said, "Use me how?" He said, "Use me how?" He said, "Your father has a meeting Monday morning with his banker to finalize the wire. They want you in that room." I said, "Okay." He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I have never been more sure of anything in my life." The meeting at Tim Hortons lasted 40 minutes. The IMET officer's name doesn't matter for the story. What matters is that by the end of it, we had a plan. I would call my father Sunday afternoon. I would tell him I had calmed down. I would tell him I had thought about it, that I understood now that family had to stick together, that I was prepared to sign the document Monday morning. I would ask sweetly to be present at the meeting with the banker because I wanted to see the paperwork myself before I committed. Jeffrey would say yes. Jeffrey would say yes because Jeffrey, for all his cunning, fundamentally could not imagine that I had any other moves. In his head, I was still the older daughter, the joyless one, the one who could always be guilted into compliance with enough pressure. He would say yes, and he would walk into the meeting on Monday morning with his attestation paperwork ready, and he would not know that the polite young man in the gray suit sitting next to his private banker was not, in fact, a junior associate from wealth management. Sunday afternoon, I made the call. I let my voice shake. I let it crack in the right places. I told my father I had been thinking and that I was so ashamed of how I had behaved Friday night. I told him I knew he had been under terrible stress. I told him I wanted to make it right. I told him I loved him. He said, "That's my girl." I could hear the relief leaking out of him through the phone. He said, "You've always been the sensible one, Bryony." I asked if I could be there Monday morning just to see the paperwork. He paused for less than a second. He said, "Of course, sweetheart. Of course you can." I hung up. I went to the bathroom. I threw up everything I had eaten in the last 24 hours, which wasn't much, and then I rinsed my mouth out, and I did not throw up again. Monday morning at 8:45, I walked into a private banking office on the 42nd floor of a tower at King and Bay. My father was already there, in his best Navy suit, with a leather portfolio under his arm, and the kind of smile he wears for clients. The bruise on my face was concealed under foundation Devin had bought me from Sephora over the phone, and my left hand was in a discreet beige wrap that looked, at a glance, like a thin glove. Jeffrey looked at the wrap, looked at me, and said nothing. The private banker shook my father's hand warmly, then mine. Behind him, getting up from a chair by the window, was a man I had never met before. Mid-40s, gray suit, no jewelry, no expression. He was introduced as a colleague from compliance who was sitting in to observe a high-value transaction. My father did not blink. Of course there's compliance. There's always compliance. We sat down. Coffee was offered, declined. Paperwork was produced. The banker walked through each document with the calm rhythm of someone who has done this 10,000 times. Then, near the bottom of the stack, he slid forward a single page printed on heavier stock and explained in a slightly flatter voice that under recent FinTrack enhancements, any cross-border wire of this nature required a sworn attestation from the account holder confirming that the funds were legally his, lawfully obtained, and not the product or proceeds of fraud. He said it the way you describe a parking validation. My father laughed. He actually laughed. He said something about how the regulators were always inventing new paperwork. He uncapped his Mont Blanc, scanned the page in roughly 2 seconds, and signed it with a flourish. The pen clicked shut. The man from compliance stood up. He reached inside his jacket and produced a thin, folded leather wallet. He flicked it open on the table. There was a badge. He said, "Jeffrey, my name is Sergeant. I'm with the Integrated Market Enforcement Team of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. You are under arrest for fraud over $5,000, theft by a person holding a power of attorney, laundering proceeds of crime, and breach of trust by a public officer of a registered family trust. You have the right to retain and instruct counsel without delay. He kept reading. The charter rights. The caution. The whole script. My father did not move. His hand was still resting on the signed attestation. His face had gone the color of skim milk, and there was a single line of sweat coming down from his left temple. He looked at me. He whispered my name. Just my name. Bryony. I stood up. I straightened my blazer with my good hand. I looked him in the eye. I said, "You didn't sign a wire transfer, Dad. You signed a sworn statement under federal law that the $11,400 in that account is legally yours. That paper is going to be Exhibit A, and once they finish auditing the trust, that signature is going to be worth somewhere between 6 and 12 years." 2 uniformed officers came in from the hallway then. They were polite, which surprised me. They asked him to stand. They asked him to put his hands behind his back. He did. He looked smaller suddenly, smaller than I had ever seen him. He looked like an old man. As they walked him toward the door, he turned his head one last time. He didn't speak. He just looked at me. And in his eyes, for the first time in my entire life, I saw something that wasn't contempt or impatience or possession. I saw fear. He was afraid of me. I held his gaze until he was past me. Then I sat back down in the leather chair and I asked the private banker for a glass of water, because my hand was starting to shake now and I didn't want anyone to see. The arrest of my mother happened that afternoon at the house in Forest Hill on charges related to receiving and concealing proceeds of crime. The recurring $9,000 deposits, which she had spent on golf memberships and vacations and a leased Lexus, made that particular case a layup. Camilla was arrested 48 hours later at her condo in Liberty Village in connection with the OSC matter, plus a fresh charge for her role in the Northridge Holdings withdrawals. The family home was placed under a restraint order within the week. I did not go to any of the bail hearings. I did not give an interview to the Globe when they called. I declined, politely. 3 separate requests from Camilla's lawyer for a meeting. I changed my number. I had Devin move in with me a month earlier than we planned. I went back to work on the following Tuesday, and I closed 2 large files before lunch because that is what I do. A reporter from a podcast reached out maybe 6 weeks later asking if I would tell my story. I said no. I said no because this isn't a story for me. It's just a Monday morning. I am very glad happened. If you've ever had to become the villain in your family's bedtime story just so you could stop being the meal in it, write the word survived in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you know somebody, a friend, a coworker, a cousin, who is still trying to bail out the people who are drowning them, please send this to them tonight. Don't wait. The thing nobody tells you is that the rescue boat has always been there. You just have to stop swimming back to the shipwreck. I'm Bryony. I'm 31 years old. I no longer have a father, a mother, or a sister. And for the first time in my entire life, I am not tired. I think about that Friday night more often than I'd like to admit. Not the punch. Not the heel grinding into my hand. Those moments, oddly, have faded. What stays with me is the silence in that dining room afterwards. 17 people who had known my father for decades, who had eaten dinner at our house, who had sent me graduation cards, and not one of them stood up. Not one of them said, "Jeffrey, that's enough." That silence taught me more about the world than any business school ever could. What I understand now, in a way I didn't at 25 or 28, is that nothing in a family like mine ever just happens. Jeffrey didn't snap that night because he was stressed. He snapped because for 30 years, every single small cruelty he had ever inflicted on me had been rewarded with my compliance, with Marigold's silence, with the check I wrote to BMO when Camilla's first business collapsed. Every time I absorbed a hit and kept smiling at Thanksgiving dinner, I was teaching him that the price of hitting me was zero. He didn't become a man who could grind his heel into his daughter's hand at the Granite Club overnight. I helped build him, one swallowed apology at a time. That's the part nobody likes to say out loud. We tend to talk about toxic families as if the damage flows in one direction, from the powerful to the powerless. But there is a quieter, harder truth, which is that staying silent in the face of small cruelties is its own kind of co-signing. I had been co-signing Jeffrey's character for my entire adult life, just as surely as I co-signed that BMO line of credit. And character, like debt, compounds. The thing I want anyone watching this to take away is not that I'm strong. I'm not. I'm a 31-year-old woman who threw up in her own bathroom Sunday afternoon because she was so frightened of her own father. What I am is methodical. I learned, somewhere around 11 years old, that I could not outshout the people in my house, but I could outwork them. I could outread them, outplan them, and outweight them. Build something useful with your hands. Learn a skill that holds up in daylight. Become someone whose word means something on paper, because there will come a day, and you will not see it coming, when the only thing standing between you and a very bad outcome is the credibility you have spent years quietly accumulating. Marigold once told me, when I was 16 and crying about something I no longer remember, that the world rewards women who learn to swallow their feelings and keep the peace. She was wrong. The world rewards women who learn to keep receipts. If there's anyone listening tonight who is still bailing out the person who is drowning them, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to put the bucket down. You are allowed to swim to shore. The shore was always there. Nobody is going to give you permission. You give it to yourself on a Friday night in a bathroom mirror with a wet tea towel pressed against your jaw. And then you get to work.